I think it's clear from my channel that I really love science fiction, or speculative fiction as some might call it. Some of my favourite media ever includes shows like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Psychopaths, and Firefly. Recently I've been watching The Expanse, and so far it's been really good, almost suspiciously good. Something that has struck me about the show is how much effort the writers have put into the science and technology that humanity has to deal with. I feel as though I've learnt more about space and physics in these first few seasons than I ever did in school. It got me thinking, though, about how important it is to present technology in a believable way, and how the level of technology really impacts the feel and plot of a sci-fi story. Even if the plot has nothing to do with the nature of technology itself, what humanity is capable of doing with that technology still has many compounding effects on the story, namely on its believability and immersion. We'll talk more in depth about the importance of these two concepts in the conclusion of this video. Until then, each section of this video is thus going to look at the different technology types, explore how they affect stories, and what writers need to keep in mind when they decide on how advanced to make each type. It's worth noting that nearly all the examples in this video are going to be looking at specifically what humanity is capable of doing rather than alien races. So with that said, I'm John from the Author's Anvil, and this is an essay on how the level of tech in sci-fi affects stories. I hope you enjoy. To start off with then, I'd like to talk about the technology involved in the day-to-day running of a society. This is stuff like infrastructure, how smart people's smartphones are, and what it's like to live in the civilization as a normal person. There are two obvious extremes here. First, you have a utopia of plenty, like in Star Trek, where humans are able to replicate limitless amounts of food, water, and objects out of thin air. This results in a moneyless society where no one has to work and instead pursues jobs or interests purely out of the joy of doing them. And then on the flip side, you have dystopias like Warhammer 40k, where humanity is on the brink of extinction due to millennia-long wars with hostile aliens. People barely have enough to survive and live in constant fear of either being press-ganged into horrific intergalactic conflicts or being the victim of a grisly alien invasion. Each of these two extremes involve a very high level of tech that is used to explore different aspects of the human condition. Will advanced technology help us to create an equitable society where we work together, or will it only deepen disparity and make us even more brutal and selfish? Or will there be something in between, like what we have in today's world, where there is a constant tug of war between pleasantness and unpleasantness? In Joss Whedon's Firefly, you have the communities who live on the fringes of civilization that have to resort to a Wild West-esque lifestyle to survive, but then equally on the inner planets you have nice, clean, modern cities. What I find interesting about both of these examples is that humanity is far less technologically advanced than in the utopia of Star Trek or the dystopia of Warhammer 40k. I wonder then if there is just a natural pull towards either extreme when you ramp up the level of tech, or would there be a way to write a story that has this more balanced perspective? If you know of such a story, then leave me a comment. I'd be very interested to check it out. Anyway, another point I want to make when it comes to infrastructure is actually a point about the rule of cool. What is the rule of cool? Well, as the esteemed scholarly institution Urban Dictionary says, it is the limit of the willing suspension of disbelief for a given element is directly proportional to its degree of coolness. In other words, it's the idea that writers can bend the internal logic of their stories or make something very unrealistic happen as long as it looks cool. For those who've been around my channel long enough and know what a crotchety old man I am, you can probably guess what I'm going to say about the rule of cool. It's kinda silly. Hear me out though, because while I think the rule of cool is silly, that's only because I firmly believe that you can make things cool while still maintaining believability. For example, the lightsaber from the Star Wars universe is a super cool looking weapon, but it doesn't break the universe because at the end of the day it's just a big plasma stick that can cut things really well. Or the presence of walker vehicles that feature in many sci-fi franchises like Warhammer 40k and The Matrix. While walker vehicles look super rad, they are still believable pieces of tech that can understandably be used as instruments of both industry and war. But how does my criticism of the rule of cool apply to sci-fi infrastructure of all things? Well, simply put, sci-fi stories very often insert high-tech flavour into the most basic day-to-day things that can really throw into question how society functions. While a bit of an extreme example, I always found Tony Stark's nanite technology in the MCU quite problematic here. Nanites can build, adjust, and bolster various technological wonders in mere seconds and can do a variety of things. We mostly see it in the form of weaponry and armour, and it looks really cool. But then, let's imagine what the world would be like if this nanite technology was invented by someone. Nanites could quickly repair infrastructure after a disaster, armor labourers against hazards and dangerous jobs, and would be useful for keeping the streets clean of litter. Someone as philanthropic as Tony Stark would surely develop this technology further and put it to the good uses I've just outlined above. In terms of the tech falling into the wrong hands, well, I imagine his multi-billion-dollar corporation could keep a nice tight monopoly on it. Surely this nanite tech would have also been super useful to help rebuild society during the snap, but I digress. The point here is that nanite technology looks really cool, but is not explored enough in the MCU in a realistic manner. This is especially problematic when you consider the fact that the MCU is supposed to be set parallel to our world in the 21st century. We as the audience are thus left with a lot of questions about why this nanite technology is not being utilised to its full potential. This is going to be a consistent theme in this video. The level of tech that you show in one scenario must have its impact considered in other areas as well. And very often civil infrastructure is left behind in this regard. How characters travel, and how far they can travel, affects the story in more ways than simply going from point A to point B. Some basic questions that speculative fiction writers need to ask themselves is how far humanity has travelled and what their limitations are. In The Expanse, for example, humanity has only colonised the solar system as they have fast propulsion for their starships, but they are still very reliant on supplies of fuel, oxygen, and water. Oh, and the characters have to deal with the horrible realism of feeling the inertia of fast travel. I like this flavour of realism a lot, as it makes adventuring in The Expanse feel dangerous. You always have it in the back of your mind that if one thing goes wrong on a ship, then everyone is at immediate risk, and this happens a lot. But this isn't to say that other approaches don't work just as well. In shows like Star Trek, humanity has discovered how to comfortably travel at the speed of light, which allows them to go and explore strange new worlds, seek out new civilizations, and boldly go where no one has gone before. Sorry, I really couldn't help myself. This is also really great, because we get a lot more interaction with alien races, and there is more room to explore characterization and philosophical themes, as the characters aren't constantly worrying about whether they're about to blow up or not, although actually this also happens a lot regardless in Star Trek. When space travel is done badly is when there are little to no limitations to the travel, or the nature of travel changes for no good reason. In Star Trek Discovery, for example, the Discovery has a spore drive that can transport them instantly to other places in the galaxy by travelling along a biofungal network. Now, there are consequences to this. The use of the spore drive harms a race of microscopic life forms when it's used, and the person who connects or drives the spore drive can potentially be greatly harmed. But I personally think that these consequences are not enough, considering that this technology allows you to instantly go anywhere in the galaxy. Just imagine in our world if somebody invented a technology that could transport a car instantly anywhere. Think of all the things a government would do with such a car. They could provide humanitarian aid to any country. They could safely transport anyone anywhere. They could assassinate or invade anyone they liked. They could teleport to different stores on Black Friday in every time zone. Oh, come on, don't look at me like that, we'd all do it. Now, imagine instead of a car, it's a flipping starship that can go anywhere in the galaxy. In Star Trek Discovery, they only use the spore drive to travel to places and then eventually decide to dismantle the technology because the consequences that I explained above are apparently too great. In my humble opinion, I think these use cases and the motivations to eventually stop using the technology are completely unrealistic and ridiculous. A government would never stop developing such an incredible transportation technology because it hurt microscopic bacteria and had the potential to hurt the driver. Aside from sharing my visceral disdain of Star Trek Discovery, the point that I want to make here is that the level of transportation that can be achieved by humanity has several huge effects on a society. Transport is one of the most important things that the human race has continually developed over the past few thousand years, and enables the advancement of globalization and civilization, but also how effectively a nation can wage war and take care of its citizens. The impact of transport should not be a mere afterthought in sci-fi stories. The tools with which we kill things has unfortunately always been a staple of human history, and this is not going to change in the future. On the brighter side, this area of the video is when I'm going to be slightly less opposed to the rule of cool. Sci-fi is a genre where you can dress up arms in a lot of different ways and make things look fancy by using different colours and a variety of styles. Projectiles can have cool explosions, laser weapons can be different colours, and even melee weapons can be featured in a variety of ways. As with much of this video, and especially here, the key thing is to balance all of that cool stuff out with consistency. If a laser gun kills a bad guy in one shot while they're wearing armour, then I'm sorry, but that has to apply to when your heroes are shot too. If you establish that humanity has starships that are capable of firing nukes at one another, then you have to make those nukes impactful. Shields are another thing that you need to ensure consistency on. Do shields completely block all damage to a ship or building for as long as they hold, or do they allow in some residual damage? Do shields block communications and teleportation? If humanity has access to shields that can block projectiles, does that mean that they can produce shield generators that block extreme weather and environments? A civilization who can produce such incredible shields for war would also produce them for other means. And oh boy, what about cloaking technology? If you can build starships that can go invisible, then surely you could build entire buildings and structures that could be cloaked as well. All too often we're shown how badass cloaking technology is in starships or on people, but rarely is it explored in these other contexts as well. The effectiveness of a cloak would again have huge implications on a society. If someone was to be able to fire while cloaked, for example, then that would be crazy. I've talked a lot about consistency in this section, and while essential, I would like to make clear that this does not mean that civilizations can't make surprise technological advancements that can break one of the rules of your story. The important word I just used there, though, was surprise. If you do introduce a new weapon or tech that affects warfare, it should be made clear that this is indeed a huge advancement, and other factions in your world should be shocked at its appearance. The consequences of this new weapon then needs to be addressed during or after the story. Does the weapon get adopted by other factions? Or perhaps the weapon turns out to have a weakness that can be exploited, which makes it so that other factions might not adopt it. Just remember that military tech advancements do happen, and if it's something groundbreaking, then you can be assured that everyone will start adopting it. Just look at what firearms did for early modern Europe. The worst thing you can do is introduce a new hip weapon in a story, have the characters defeat it, and then for this new weapon to be forgotten or just disregarded in the future with no explanation. From warfare then, let's segue into medicine. There is a very simple maxim to keep in mind when thinking about how advanced a sci-fi story's medicine is. The more advanced your medical technology, the more challenging it is to create tension. There really isn't much to explain here. If humanity has super advanced medical tech, then it's going to be harder to put characters into meaningful danger. Now, I know in a lot of sci-fi or superhero stories you'll have the characters facing off against alien technology, so you could make the argument that perhaps the medical tech humanity has access to is only effective against human weaponry. But if that's the case, then that needs to be made very clear to the audience or reader as early as possible. This ties back in with what we were saying earlier about weapons. The key here is consistency. If a random person can't be saved after being shot once from a laser gun, then I'm afraid neither can your main characters. The effectiveness of medicine must remain consistent. Diseases, viruses, and illnesses, on the other hand, I think you have much more liberty with. People in real life respond differently to everything from the common cold to cancer, so it's fair to assume that the same will be true of alien ailments. I think something else to note in general about medicine in speculative fiction is the speed at which people are treated. It is a bit of a pet peeve of mine when characters are grievously injured but are then cured in either the next episode or in another short space of time. No matter how advanced medical tech is in a sci-fi world, I think it should be at least limited in the sense that the human body needs time to recover, both in a physical and mental capacity. Slight spoilers here, but a good example of this is in Star Trek Deep Space Nine when Nog loses his leg in the Dominion War. Despite the utopia of the Star Trek universe's medical care, Nog spends several episodes off-screen before returning to the story, half-crippled and suffering from PTSD. Even though Nog is just a side character, it becomes very clear to the audience that despite the wonders of the future, people can still get hurt and still go through horrific experiences, and knowing this deepens the tension for the remainder of the show. To sum up this section then, I think what I want to see out of advanced medical technology in speculative fiction are clearly defined limitations. These limitations could be taking a long time to perform the advanced medicine, or the advanced medicine requiring specialist tech that is only available in a few facilities. Or maybe having advanced medicine trigger other side effects. I think this could be a neat idea, that maybe you can quickly cure and seal up a bullet wound, but then the body goes into shock after a few hours. A time limit like that could add another source of tension for a character to have to get through a fight within a certain length of time. Okay, that idea is totally going in my folder, please no one else take that. So we've talked a lot about different impacts that technology has on sci-fi stories. Let's have a quick roundup of some key points. The level of tech that you show in one scenario must have its impact considered in other areas as well. Civil infrastructure is often forgotten about here. Transport and interstellar travel is one of the most important areas of technology to flesh out. The rules and capabilities of different technologies need to remain consistent within a story, and if they are to be broken, it needs to be surprising for the characters and needs to have an understandable reason behind it. And finally, there must be limitations to technologies that must be clearly set out early on in the story. But now is the time to ask the eternal question: why do we care about all this? Am I just a nitpicky nerd who takes all of this way too seriously? The answer is pretty simple. We care about this because making sure technology is believable makes the story more immersive and helps the audience understand the stakes. And with the audience immersed and able to understand when a character is or isn't in danger, they are thus more entertained. Not sure what exactly stakes are? Well, check out some of my other videos for an in-depth explanation. Whether you know the importance of stakes or not, however, I think we can all at least agree that when a story or franchise presents advanced technology well, it's just really neat and adds icing on the cake. I struggle to imagine anyone rathering that a story had really inconsistent or completely unfathomable technology. And I am not saying for a second that any of this is easy, and I appreciate that when it comes to film and TV, it's not just the writer who's in charge of making technology believable. There's the director, the design team, the CGI or animation teams. It really is everyone's responsibility. But as always, my argument boils down to the fact that the more logical effort you put into a story, the more you get out as a professional, and the more your audience gets out from the experience you provide them. Thanks very much for watching. I had an absolute blast word vomiting my thoughts on technology and sci-fi stories, and I hope it wasn't too painful for you. As always, there are things I've probably missed or haven't explored as much as some of you might want me to, but I really want my videos to serve as an educational springboard rather than a complete comprehensive lecture. But if you do think I missed something massive, then let me know, and perhaps I can make another video about it in the future. It'd also be really cool if some of you could recommend me some good sci-fi. I'm nearing the end of The Expanse, will then probably watch something a little different to cleanse my palate, but will then inevitably need my sci-fi itch scratched once again. Regardless, thanks again for tuning in, feel free to check out some of my other content, and I hope you all keep writing.